Hello and welcome to ESG Unearthed, a collaboration between Future of Mining 365 and Sympact Advisory. My name is Liz Freele, Managing Partner at Sympact, a sustainability think tank and ESG consultancy serving the mining industry and beyond. Joining me today, we have Sarah Gordon, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Satarla, a global network of risk management experts with a wealth of experience in the industry. Sarah is also the mastermind behind the unique and innovative Responsible Raw Materials Conference, the learnings from which we'll be diving into today to kick off the series. So Sarah, you've been in this game for quite a while. You bring a highly informed, practical perspective to the subject. Things are changing very quickly in the ESG world. You just wrapped up the second edition of the Responsible Raw Materials Conference. And I wonder if we could start maybe by sharing a bit about what you've seen from year one to year two of the conference. What are the big learnings and what has changed in that time?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Liz. And thank you so much for having me here with you today. It's really exciting to be a part of all of this. So as you quite rightly say, 12 months ago, we had the first ever Responsible Raw Materials online conference, during which we explored what is actually meant by responsible raw materials. So it was really trying to understand perspectives from everybody, from those who work within, say, the mining sector, through to investors, policymakers, NGOs, communities, etc. So people really exploring what is responsibility. Track forwards 12 months, and instead of talking about, well, what do we mean by responsibility, we were actually now looking for, okay, so how do you make it a reality? And the reason why we did that was because, yeah, everybody knows that sustainability is now, well, is important, but how do we make it real? And so that was one of the really exciting focus points of the conference.
Cool. And I'm wondering, so what gives you hope? What's going well? Like, you had people from all over the world presenting, attending, a lot of really great discussions. I wonder if you might share a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, a huge amount has changed in the last year, not least because, of course, we've all been locked up at home, but actually what that's allowed perhaps to come to the fore or be accelerated is the fact that the world of finance is now seriously talking about sustainability and looking to invest in those responsible companies that can provide the raw materials that are needed for things like the energy transition. So that's gone from being almost a hypothesis perhaps 12 months ago to now becoming more of a reality. So we're not there yet, but I think the exciting thing is that the money is coming, which is brilliant. And this goes hand in hand with a lot of what we're seeing at the moment with, say, G7, COP26, etc. So a lot of the world policymakers really coming to the table and saying, okay, how do we make this a reality as well? Because we need to make this energy transition. We need to all live in a more sustainable way, but how on earth do we do it? So lots of really exciting change. And we certainly heard from a wealth of different people during the conference who are giving us insight as to what they're doing to making these changes a reality.
That's super cool. And so what is it that you think we need to focus on more? You said we're not there yet. How can companies prepare for what's coming down the line?
So I think it's a case here where at the moment there is a whole forest of different ESG standards and expectations and principles, etc., that are out there. And if there's something that we don't need another standard because we've already got lots of them. But what we do need is actually for people to be able to look at what are the true intentions or kind of the real impact and action aspects of those standards. So there needs to be a bit of an alignment between all of those different stakeholders, all those different expectations, so that, say, if you are a mining company, at the moment, you're being requested to adhere to lots and lots and lots of different standards, which is costing a huge amount of time and effort, especially for those experts within those companies who are focused on environment, social and governance. And actually, they've got enough to do in terms of making all of that a reality rather than just filling in.
Doing the doing, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I think something that we're beginning to see coming is that kind of not necessarily merging, but homogenization of those standards. But with that, it's not a simplification of what's going on. It's more the understanding that if you're looking at a particular operation, you need to understand the context in which it's operating. And then the second questions need to be all around action. So what are you actually doing to ensure that you're acting in a responsible way. So you're seeing a big shift going on with regards to that. And then the second aspect that's coming with that is that at the moment, most stakeholders rely on those operations to fill in self-assessments to say, hey, this is how good we're doing. And that's brilliant. But there are two things. Firstly, most of them just invite people to hit a compliance level rather than giving credit for where someone's going above and beyond, especially if an exploration project is planning really great stuff for the future. We need to be able to give them credit for that. And the second thing is looking for independent verifiable data sets to say, okay, well, actually, maybe from a satellite or taking a water sample and analyzing the DNA within it to say, okay, well, what's going on with the biodiversity? So what's beginning to happen is that those investors, insurers, customers of those organizations are beginning to search for independent data sets. They can say, okay, cool, this is what's going on with that operation, rather than just relying on the operation themselves. And I think that will not only take some of the pressure off the operations, but perhaps shine a slightly better light in terms of what's really going on across the world.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm glad that you went there, actually. So I wanted to ask you a little more. I mean, most companies are absolutely overwhelmed by the number of standards and frameworks, and like we get companies all the time asking us, oh my gosh, do we need to create a whole new role just for people to respond to this? Literally like writing reports, answering the same question in 3 different ways to 3 different entities. So most people agree, yes, we do not need any more standards. We're rapidly moving towards standardization, harmonization of this very chaotic landscape. What's good and bad about this trend? Obviously harmonization might be good in terms of being able to report in a singular fashion. However, I imagine there's some negatives that folks might not really be thinking about and maybe you should prepare for. Do you have any suggestions for companies?
Yeah, so I think companies should be able to push back. So like if they're being asked a question that's really not relevant to them, then actually say, I don't think this is relevant to us, and this is why. Because there's an awful lot of box ticking that's going on. And as soon as you feel that you're ticking a box, that's not necessarily helping what's happening there. And the number of times I've been asked, oh, can you quickly give us a human rights policy? Well, why? Because this standard requires it. Well, it's like, well, I can give you a human rights policy, but that's not going to mean anything. It's actually, well, what are you really doing on the ground? And so I think that that's a case where the trick with this shift in what the standards are focusing on is to make sure we don't regress back into tick boxing, which then in turn leads to greenwashing, which nobody wants. Because actually
and it's a waste of time and resource and
exactly. And I think the other thing as well is that, you know, we've seen certainly within Europe, so with things like the task force for carbon disclosure, so massive focus on carbon, and of course this is worldwide as well. Now, of course, you know, carbon and emissions are incredibly important, but sustainability is far broader than just climate change. And with all of that, there often needs to be a balancing act. If all we needed to fix on Earth was carbon, that would be difficult, but doable. But if we did it without keeping an eye on things like water, biodiversity, people, we're going to actually inadvertently damage all of those. And so that's a case there where making sure we're not inadvertently focusing in on just one aspect when we need to keep an eye across all of them as well.
Right, because there's a real danger in approaching things in such a siloed way. Like it's not an effective way to manage your enterprise risk.
Exactly. It has to be integrated and it has to be dynamic. And the other thing as well about all of this is that we're never going to have all of the facts or all the data because we're trying to predict the future. And if we could predict the future 100%, well, the world would be a very different place.
Sorry, did you want to say something else there?
I just want one more thing as well is that I think people are beginning to talk about sort of like an ESG score or a sustainability footprint ranking. And whilst there is merit certainly in giving scores, having a single number or a single rating is really dangerous. Because, and maybe it's because I'm originally a geologist, and so we can never give a straight answer. We always say, well, on this hand, it could be this, and on this hand, it could be that. it's the same when it comes to sustainability, because there's so many variables. Actually, it is much more honest, perhaps, and truthful to say, okay, well, given the context of what we're looking at and the actions that that organization is either taking or could take, actually, there's probably a bit of a range that's going on here in terms of what that overarching score could be. And so I know there's lots of discussions going on with regards to that at the moment. And I think my suggestion would be try not to go for a single score, because you will lose actually the truth of what's going on with that situation, and instead try to build into your scoring some form of range with regards to that, because that will therefore include a lot more about the diversity and the variability of the context and the actions with regards to what might be going on the ground.
And that sounds like it's a message also not just to mining companies, but just as much to the investor and insurance community that are relying increasingly on these, number or letter grades or on the ratings and the rankings, right?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, so I mean, so like a lot of the investors, and we had some of them speaking at the conference, which was brilliant, and they are really, they are very, very interested in trying to understand, okay, who are the most responsible companies, and what does it look like, and how can we measure it, and what data can we keep an eye on to make sure that companies continue to be responsible and are building the right foundations for the future. So they're all keen to look at that, and they understand that when you're assessing the risk of a company, it's never just a straightforward answer. There are always pros and cons. And so the investors are certainly asking for that, because they want to invest in things like natural resources. Whereas at the moment, in a lot of capital markets, etc., mining is rated at the same level as things like tobacco and gambling and alcohol and arms. Whereas actually, we really need the raw materials to do most things 100%. On our planet.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's a whole other discussion, right, around what the industry and beyond needs to do to help folks understand that, and how do we make this industry interesting? To not be seen like tobacco. So Satarla specializes in risk management. What do you think that the industry most needs to change about the way we approach ESG risk? If you were to give, one or two pieces of advice specifically on this.
Sure. So ESG risk sometimes gets managed in silos. So sometimes you have the environmental department just looking after the environmental bits, social looking after social, and then governance, which is generally on the legal side, looking after that. But unfortunately, what that often leads to is an incomplete picture. And so instead, they need to be managed in an integrated manner, and not just amongst themselves, but with everything else that's going on in the organization, because actually the environmental team often doesn't have the controls that are needed to manage the environmental risks. That's often in production or engineering or maybe finance. And so what that points us at is, rather than having siloed risk management, you need that integrated enterprise-wide risk management. And that's what we very much specialize in. And we've seen that work in a really simple way. It doesn't need to be really heavy and bureaucratic. It can be very, very simple. And what you can do is you can pull really good learnings from things like health and safety, finance, risk management, who are really good at all of this, and then stitch it all together. So that would be number one, actually make sure you're managing your risks in that integrated manner. Second thing is be open to those risks changing very quickly, not just because the risks might be changing, but because your understanding of those risks might be changing. And that's because you might get new information coming in that provides extra clarity with regards to what's going on. So that dynamic form of managing those risks is hugely important, especially when it comes to the social space, because people are really exciting, and people change their minds quite quickly. And Liz, you're the expert on all of this. One moment you think everything's good. And the next moment, actually, someone's says, actually, I'm concerned about something over here. So actually, that kind of attitude and the empathy for the risk management is quite different, perhaps, to more traditional forms of risk management.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's a totally different mindset. So this is the problem that we kind of often see within the mining sector that has some of the world's best engineers, for example, and where actually a very kind of linear form of risk management works really well, because you can see how that machine is working or how that process works. But the world of social is chaotic, I say in a very polite way.
People don't fit into boxes like that, right?
No.
And they change their minds, as you said. It's why they say social license to operate is a moment in time, nothing more.
Exactly. And that's why your social license to operate is not a piece of paper. It can never be a piece of paper. And it's something that's based on trust and respect, and actually treating people, one another with dignity and all of that kind of stuff. And so therefore that the mindset to try and understand those different aspects of risk is really important to understand, or at least go, well, you know what, I don't really get that. That's fine.
It's okay to say so.
It's okay to say that and say, I don't really understand this, because that's why you need that diversity of thought being brought into, okay, well, what does the true risk profile look like for our organization? Because it's through that integration and through that network thinking that we can then say, okay, what's actually happening here? What are those big ticket items that we need to be keeping an eye on with regards to our risks? And also thinking, okay, risks aren't just about trying to stop bad stuff from happening. It's also about trying to create those opportunities as well.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to say that, right? That risk is opportunity, and let us not forget that that's as true of ESG as anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the opportunity side of all of this is actually what makes the extractive sectors so exciting at the moment, because, okay, those of us who work within mining, we know that everybody needs the raw materials that come out of the ground, but do they want them in the way in which we're producing those raw materials? And so that's something there where we really need to think, okay, how do we ensure that the sector is seen as an opportunity for the global population rather than a threat to destroying our planet on which we live? And we can make that shift. It's just that we need to start, and lots of companies already are, we need to start acting like it, and then also monitoring ourselves in the right way and sharing all of those stories as well, like showing where it's actually working and learning from one another as well, because it's difficult. And it's really exciting because, everybody needs what we produce out the ground, but we've got to be able to produce it in the right way.
100%. Super insightful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah. Any last thoughts, comments, advice that you'd like to share on the subject?
I think just that it's really exciting that it's evolving so fast, and certainly similar to yourself, Liz, every day I learn new items. I think, oh wow, that's an amazing new tool or approach or something that could be tried somewhere else completely different in the world. And I think it's really, really exciting that everybody is stepping up to the table at the moment. Things are changing really, really, really quickly. I think the money is there, the insurance is beginning to come, the governance is coming, etc. as well. Now we just need, as operators, everyone to say, great, let's take advantage of this opportunity and mine as responsibly as we possibly can.